Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. You're probably going to fail at life, not in some dramatic, catastrophic way, but in the quiet, devastating way where you wake up at 45 years old and realize you've been sleepwalking for 2 decades. You followed the rules, you did what you were supposed to do, and somehow you ended up living a life that feels like it belongs to someone else. And Friedrich Nietzsche predicted exactly why this would happen over 100 years ago. Today I'm going to show you the exact mechanism by which most people fail at life without even realizing they're failing. And I'm warning you right now, this is going to be uncomfortable, because there's a good chance you're already on the path to failure, and you've convinced yourself it's actually the path to success. So let's start with the most important question. What does it even mean to fail at life? Because most people think failure means being broke, or alone, or addicted, or homeless. And sure, those are forms of failure. But Nietzsche understood there's a much more common form of failure that nobody talks about. It's living an entire life without ever becoming who you actually are. It's spending 70 or 80 years on this planet playing a role someone else wrote for you. That's the real failure, and it's everywhere. Look around you. How many people do you know who seem genuinely alive? Not just existing, not just going through the motions, but actually alive, pursuing things they care about, becoming who they want to be, living according to their own values. If you're honest, it's probably not many. Most people are what Nietzsche called the last men. They're comfortable, they're safe, they're following the script, and they're completely dead inside. And here's what's terrifying. They don't even know they're dead inside. They've convinced themselves that this is what life is supposed to be. You go to school, you get a job, you buy things, you watch Netflix, you scroll social media, you complain about politics, you take vacations twice a year, and then you die. And if you question this, if you suggest there might be more to life, people look at you like you're crazy. Nietzsche predicted this. He said that modern life would create a specific type of person, someone who wants nothing more than comfort and safety. Someone who has no great ambitions, no burning desires, no willingness to suffer for something meaningful. Someone who just wants to be left alone to pursue small pleasures. And he was right. That's most people. That's probably you. Now, before you get defensive, before you start listing all the ways you're different, just sit with that for a moment. Are you really pursuing something meaningful? Or are you just optimizing for comfort? Are you becoming who you want to be? Or are you becoming who you're expected to be? Are you building a life you choose? Or are you just accepting the default options? Here's why most people fail at life, according to Nietzsche. They never develop what he called the will to power. And no, this isn't about dominating other people. The will to power is about having a powerful drive to overcome yourself, to constantly become more, to refuse to accept your current state as your final state. It's about having something you're willing to suffer for, something that makes all the difficulty worthwhile. Most people don't have this. They have the will to comfort instead. They organize their entire lives around avoiding pain, avoiding risk, avoiding discomfort. And this seems rational. This seems like the smart approach. But it's actually the mechanism of failure, because anything meaningful in life requires you to go through discomfort. There is no comfortable path to a life worth living. Think about it. Every meaningful relationship requires difficult conversations. Every meaningful career requires risk and uncertainty. Every meaningful personal growth requires you to face things about yourself you'd rather avoid. If your primary goal is comfort, you will systematically avoid everything that makes life meaningful. And then you'll wonder why your life feels empty. Nietzsche saw this happening in his own time, and it's gotten so much worse now. We live in a culture that's completely obsessed with eliminating discomfort. Everyone needs to feel safe. Everyone needs to avoid triggers. Everyone needs constant validation. We've created a world where you can live your entire life without ever being genuinely challenged, without ever having to face difficulty, without ever having to grow. And people think this is progress. They think this is enlightenment. But Nietzsche would say, this is death. This is the creation of a society of last men. People who are so comfortable, so safe, so unchallenged that they never become anything. They just exist. They consume. They distract themselves. And they call it living. Let me tell you about another reason people fail. Nietzsche talked about the herd mentality. Most people don't think for themselves. They don't choose their own values. They don't decide what they actually want. They just absorb whatever their environment tells them to want. Their family, their friends, their culture, social media, advertising, all of it pouring into their heads, telling them what to value, what to pursue, what to be. And here's the insidious part. People think these are their own thoughts. They think they're making their own choices, but they're not. They're just executing the programming. They want the things they're supposed to want. The house, the car, the wedding, the vacation, the promotion. Not because these things actually align with who they are, but because these are the things you're supposed to want. This is why people can achieve all their goals and still feel empty. They climbed the ladder only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. They spent 20 years pursuing something they didn't even actually want. They were just following the herd, and the herd doesn't know where it's going. It's just moving because everyone else is moving. You want to know if you're part of the herd? Ask yourself this. Can you articulate why you want the things you want? Not just surface level reasons, but deep reasons. Why do you want that job? Why do you want that lifestyle? Why do you want that relationship? If your answer sounds like something out of a commercial or something your parents would say, you're part of the herd. You're failing at life because you're living someone else's life. Now here's where it gets really dark. Nietzsche talked about something he called the last man. And this is the endpoint of herd mentality. The last man is someone who has no ambitions beyond comfort. Someone who thinks the highest achievement is to be safe, to be comfortable, to be happy in a shallow, fleeting way. Someone who looks at people with great ambitions and thinks they're crazy. The last man says things like, "What's the point of working that hard?" Or, "Why stress yourself out?" Or, "Isn't it enough to just be happy?" And on the surface, these seem like reasonable questions. But what they're really saying is, I have nothing I care about enough to suffer for. I have no great loves, no great purposes, nothing that makes life feel worth living beyond momentary pleasures. And this is most people. Most people would rather be comfortable than great. Most people would rather avoid pain than pursue meaning. Most people have been so domesticated by modern life that they can't even imagine wanting something enough to sacrifice for it. They look at people who are driven, who are ambitious, who are willing to suffer for their goals, and they think those people are the problem. Nietzsche would say, the last man is the ultimate failure, because the last man has given up on becoming anything. They've accepted their current state as their final state. They've stopped growing, stopped striving, stopped reaching for anything beyond what's easy and comfortable. And then they rationalize this as wisdom. They call it being realistic or being mature or being content. But it's not. It's failure disguised as virtue. Let me tell you about another mechanism of failure that Nietzsche identified: slave morality. This is when you define what's good based on what makes you feel safe and what protects you from challenge. So, things like excessive humility, conformity, obedience, self-sacrifice, these become your highest values. And here's why this leads to failure. Because these values are designed to keep you small. Slave morality doesn't say, become great. It says, don't stand out. Don't be arrogant. Don't be selfish. Don't pursue your own interests too much. It's a moral system designed to keep people manageable, to keep them from threatening the existing order, to keep them from actually becoming powerful. And most people have internalized this completely. They're more afraid of being seen as arrogant than they are of wasting their potential. They're more concerned with what people think than with what they could become. They've been trained to see their own ambition as a character flaw. So they stay small, they stay safe, they pursue mediocre goals that won't make anyone uncomfortable, and they fail at life while feeling morally superior about it. You want to know if you've internalized slave morality? Pay attention to your self-talk. When you think about doing something ambitious, what voice pops up? Does it say, "Who do you think you are?" Does it say, "That's selfish"? Does it say, "People will think you're arrogant"? Does it say, "You should be grateful for what you have"? That's slave morality. That's the internalized voice of mediocrity trying to keep you manageable. And the worst part is, other people will reinforce this. When you try to break free, when you try to pursue something meaningful, the people around you will often try to pull you back down. Not because they're evil, but because your growth makes them uncomfortable. It reminds them of their own stagnation. So they'll use moral language to try to stop you. They'll tell you you're being irresponsible, or arrogant, or selfish. And if you believe them, you'll stop growing. You'll fail at life while surrounded by people telling you you're doing the right thing. Now let's talk about something Nietzsche called resentment. This is one of the most toxic psychological patterns, and it's everywhere. Resentment is when you can't achieve something, so instead of admitting that and improving, you convince yourself that thing was never valuable anyway. You turn your failure into a moral victory. The person who can't build a successful business convinces themselves that business owners are greedy. The person who can't get in shape convinces themselves that caring about fitness is vain. The person who can't create anything convinces themselves that ambition is shallow. They're not just failing. They're building an entire worldview around their failure that makes it impossible to ever succeed. And this is why people stay stuck for decades, because they're not just dealing with a practical problem. They're dealing with a psychological defense mechanism that makes the problem unsolvable. You can't get better at something if you've convinced yourself that thing is bad. You can't pursue a goal if you've convinced yourself the goal is immoral. Look at your own life. What have you convinced yourself doesn't matter? What have you decided isn't important? What have you rationalized as not being worth pursuing? Now, ask yourself honestly, did you decide that through genuine reflection? Or did you decide that after failing, or after being too afraid to try? Because if it's the latter, that's resentment. That's failure disguising itself as wisdom. Here's another reason most people fail, and this one's going to make you uncomfortable. Nietzsche said that you need to love your fate, amor fati. Whatever your circumstances are, whatever cards you've been dealt, you need to embrace them fully and use them as the exact conditions necessary for your growth. But most people don't do this. Most people spend their entire lives complaining about their circumstances. If only they had more money. If only they had better parents. If only they lived somewhere else. If only they had different opportunities. If only, if only, if only. They're waiting for perfect conditions before they start living, and perfect conditions never come. This is a guaranteed path to failure, because life is never going to be perfect. Your circumstances are never going to be ideal. There's always going to be something you can point to as an excuse. And if you're waiting for all the obstacles to disappear before you start pursuing what matters, you're going to die waiting. The obstacles are the path. The challenges are the curriculum. The difficulties are what make success meaningful. Nietzsche would say that the ability to embrace your fate, to stop complaining about your circumstances and start using them, is one of the key differences between people who succeed at life and people who fail. Winners look at obstacles and see opportunities. Losers look at opportunities and see obstacles. Same reality, completely different interpretation. So ask yourself right now, what are you complaining about? What circumstances are you using as an excuse not to pursue what matters? Whatever it is, that's probably the exact thing you need to embrace and work with. That limitation might be the thing that forces you to develop the skills and character you need to succeed. But you'll never know if you spend all your time wishing it was different. Let me tell you about one of the most dangerous traps that leads to failure. Nietzsche talked about how most people never become who they are. They spend their entire lives being who they think they're supposed to be. They never do the difficult work of figuring out their own values, their own desires, their own path. They just accept the default programming and call it their life. And this is absolutely everywhere. People go into careers they don't care about because it's what their parents wanted or what pays well or what seems prestigious. They pursue relationships that don't fulfill them because it's what they're supposed to do at their age. They live in places they don't like because that's where their job is. They spend money on things they don't care about because that's what successful people do. They're performing someone else's idea of a good life. And the worst part is, many of them don't even realize it. They feel this vague dissatisfaction, this sense that something's missing, but they can't identify what it is. What's missing is them, their actual self, the person they could have been if they'd ever bothered to figure out who that is. Here's a test. Can you describe what you value without using words that came from your parents, your culture, your education? Can you explain what you want without referencing what you're supposed to want? Can you articulate who you are beyond your roles and labels? If you can't, you're failing at life because you're not even living your own life. You're living a hand-me-down life. And becoming who you are is terrifying because it might mean admitting that everything you've built is wrong. It might mean disappointing people. It might mean starting over. It might mean being misunderstood. Most people aren't willing to face that. So they spend their whole lives wearing a mask, playing a role, being who they're supposed to be instead of who they are. And they wonder why life feels hollow. Now, let's talk about one of the most important concepts for understanding why people fail. Nietzsche talked about the eternal recurrence. Imagine you had to live your exact life, every single moment, over and over again for eternity. Nothing changes. Every choice you made, every action you took, every moment of your life, repeated infinitely. Could you embrace that? Would you want that? If the answer is no, you're failing. You're living in a way you wouldn't choose if you had to live it forever. You're wasting time. You're avoiding what matters. You're settling for less than you could be. And the eternal recurrence test doesn't let you lie to yourself. You can't say you'll change tomorrow because tomorrow is the same as today in eternal recurrence. You can't say this is temporary because nothing is temporary if it repeats forever. Most people would be horrified to live their lives again. They're spending most of their time on things that don't matter. They're avoiding the challenges that would make life meaningful. They're settling for comfortable mediocrity. They're not becoming anything. They're just passing time until they die. And if you had to do that for eternity, it would be hell. But here's what Nietzsche is really saying with this thought experiment. You should live in such a way that you would choose to repeat your life eternally. You should be doing things that matter so much to you that you'd be willing to do them forever. You should be becoming someone you respect so much that you'd be happy to be that person for eternity. That's what it means to succeed at life. So, use this test right now. If you had to live today over and over forever, would you be okay with that? What about this week, this month, this year? If the answer is no, what are you doing? Why are you living in a way you wouldn't choose to repeat? Why are you wasting your limited time on Earth doing things that don't matter enough to do forever? Here's another massive reason people fail that Nietzsche identified. Most people are addicted to pity, not just feeling pity for others, but wanting pity for themselves. They love being victims. They love having excuses. They love explaining why their life is hard and why nothing is their fault. And this feels good in the moment because it absolves them of responsibility. But it's absolutely poisonous, because when you see yourself as a victim, you give away all your power. If nothing is your fault, then you can't change anything. You're just floating along, buffeted by circumstances, unable to control your own life. And this is comfortable in a sick way because it means you never have to try. You never have to take risks. You never have to face the possibility that you could have done better. Nietzsche would say that pity, especially self-pity, is one of the most destructive emotions because it keeps you weak, it keeps you stuck, it gives you permission to fail. And our modern culture is completely soaked in this. Everyone's competing to be the biggest victim. Everyone's got a reason why they can't succeed. Everyone wants sympathy instead of solutions. And if you're stuck in this mindset, you will fail at life. Guaranteed, because you're not taking responsibility for your life. You're not seeing yourself as the author of your own story. You're seeing yourself as a passive character to whom things happen. And as long as you see yourself that way, nothing changes. The shift you need to make is brutal but necessary. Everything in your life is your responsibility. Not your fault necessarily, but your responsibility. Your circumstances, your emotions, your relationships, your career, your health, all of it. Even the things that happened to you that genuinely weren't your fault. Your response to those things is your responsibility. And until you accept that, you're powerless. Let me tell you about one more way people fail. Nietzsche talked about the death of God, and most people completely misunderstand what he meant. He wasn't celebrating, he was warning us. He was saying that when people stop believing in traditional religion and traditional values, they don't automatically become free thinkers. Most of them just find new things to worship, new authorities to obey, new dogmas to follow. And he was absolutely right. Look at modern life. People who don't believe in God believe in science as if it's infallible. They believe in political ideologies as if they're absolute truth. They believe in social media consensus as if popularity equals correctness. They've just replaced old authorities with new authorities. They're still following the herd. They still haven't learned to think for themselves. This is why most people fail. They never develop intellectual independence. They never question deeply. They never examine their own beliefs and values to see if they're actually true. or if they just absorb them from their environment. They're mentally lazy. They want someone else to tell them what to think, what to value, what to pursue, and then they spend their lives living according to these unexamined beliefs. Nietzsche's solution was to become what he called a free spirit, someone who questions everything, someone who thinks for themselves, someone who creates their own values based on what actually enhances life, rather than just accepting whatever values they inherited. But this is difficult. It's lonely. It means you might come to conclusions that separate you from the herd. And most people aren't willing to pay that price. So they stay in the herd. They think what they're supposed to think. They want what they're supposed to want. They live how they're supposed to live. And they fail at life because they never become individuals. They're just copies, variations on a theme, interchangeable parts in a machine. And deep down, some part of them knows it. Here's what this all comes down to. Nietzsche predicted that most people would fail at life because most people are not willing to do what's necessary to succeed. They're not willing to embrace difficulty. They're not willing to think independently. They're not willing to take full responsibility. They're not willing to question their programming. They're not willing to risk comfort for meaning. They're not willing to become who they actually are instead of who they're supposed to be. Success at life, real success, requires you to be exceptional. Not in the sense of being better than others, but in the sense of being an exception to the rules. You have to be willing to suffer for something meaningful. You have to be willing to stand alone. You have to be willing to be misunderstood. You have to be willing to face difficulty that others avoid. You have to be willing to become your own person in a world that wants you to be a copy. And most people aren't willing to do that. They want success, but they want it to be comfortable. They want meaning, but they don't want to suffer for it. They want to be individuals, but they don't want to separate from the herd. They want transformation, but they don't want to change. And so, they fail. Not dramatically, but quietly. Not all at once, but slowly, year after year, until they wake up one day and realize they wasted their life. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be that way. You can choose differently, right now, today. You can decide to stop following the herd. You can decide to embrace difficulty. You can decide to figure out who you actually are. You can decide to take full responsibility for your life. You can decide to pursue something meaningful regardless of whether it's comfortable. The question is, will you, or are you going to prove Nietzsche right? Are you going to be another person who fails at life because it's easier than succeeding? Are you going to be another last man, comfortable and safe and completely dead inside? Are you going to spend your one life being who you're supposed to be instead of who you are? That's the choice. And it's not a one-time choice. It's a choice you make every single day. Every time you face discomfort, you choose whether to embrace it or avoid it. Every time you face a decision, you choose whether to follow the herd or think for yourself. Every time you face difficulty, you choose whether to grow or to make excuses. Nietzsche predicted most people would make the comfortable choice. Most people would choose safety over meaning. Most people would choose conformity over individuality. Most people would choose mediocrity over greatness. He predicted that modern life would create a world full of last men, and he was right. Look around, he was absolutely right. But you don't have to be one of them. You can be the exception. You can be someone who actually lives, someone who becomes who they are, someone who pursues meaning even when it's difficult, someone who takes responsibility, someone who thinks independently, someone who refuses to settle for comfortable failure. The path is clear, Nietzsche laid it out. The question is whether you have the courage to walk it, because most people don't. Most people will fail at life, and now you know exactly why.